Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly. On this episode, I'm joined by Corey Haselhuhn from Schultz Outfitters. I caught up with Sleddy on an early April evening after the shop closed. Warmer weather was starting to take hold in Michigan, and we discussed the upcoming season and his journey to Schultz Outfitters, and we took a deep dive into carp on the fly. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. But before we get to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please subscribe and leave us a rating and review in the podcatcher of your choice. It really helps us out. And a shout out to our sponsor, Trout Routes. I've known the team at Trout Routes almost before there was a team at Trout Routes. We all know streams are getting crowded, and chances are you're not the only one at your local access point. Get away from the crowds and busy gravel lots by using Trout Routes Pro with over 350,000 access points mapped across 50,000 trout streams and much more. Trout Routes has all the data you need to help you find angling opportunities that others will overlook. Up your game and download the app today. Use code ARTFLY20, ARTFLY20, all one word, for 20% off of your Trout Routes Pro membership at maps.troutroutes.com. Now, on to our interview. Well, Sleddy, welcome to The Articulate Fly.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Dude, I'm totally looking forward to it, and we have a tradition on The Articulate Fly. We like to ask all of our guests to share their earliest fishing memory.
Fair enough. I thinking about that off the rip here, I would say I started fishing pretty young. I think the first time I ever caught a fish was probably around the age of 4 or 5, but my first really distinct memory in my time fishing was probably around 10 or 11 when I caught my first northern pike. And there was a place up north here in Michigan where my family had some property, and it was kind of like a homeowners association up north that had a really nice man-made lake within the boundaries of the property up there. And there was a medium-sized dam at one of the ends of the lake that connected to a small creek, and there was a small pit below the dam, kind of in a ravine that was surrounded by rocks, and it wasn't quite cut off from the river, but it was almost like a pool that was separate before you got into the creek. And I remember my first interaction with a pike with a friend of mine there, actually being bit off by one, and then going back and finally achieving success and landing that fish, and being very intimidated with the teeth and the slimy coating on the fish, and tough to handle, and just a vicious looking creature. But that's probably one of my most distinct early on memories of fishing. I would say the one that stands out most to me.
Very neat. And so when did you come to the dark side of fly fishing?
Fly fishing started for me. I developed a taste, kind of an inquiry based thing. I had a family member who got me a yearly subscription to Field and Stream. And I remember reading an article in that one of the issues in regards to the holy water of the Asabo River and the trout fishing there. And I became fairly captivated with the whole idea of trout and dry fly and nymph fishing, and thought it was really cool, the matching the insects and tying your own flies. And I actually, oddly enough, started tying before I actually went out and started to pursue fish with a fly rod. I dug into the fly tying end of things first. So that was roughly around the age of 13, 14. And then as I grew older, into 15, 16 range, I got a rod and reel and taught myself how to cast it, and would dabble around with that. I grew up a stone's throw from Lake St. Clair here in the Metro Detroit region. So that was kind of my starting place for learning how to cast and fish the rod, catching panfish. And as I got a little bit, my skill sets improved, the occasional bass. But that was the Kickstarter for me. And then really, really started to go full steam once I reached the high school range of things. And when I was about a junior in high school is when I really, really started to get head over heels with it, and really adamantly pursued it, from that point on, and never really looked back.
Yeah. So that was the point where it started ruining your life, right?
Yeah, definitely captivated me a lot more than I thought it would. I developed a a love of fishing pretty early on and was always very captivated by it, and the places it took me and the people it connected me to. But once I started fly fishing, that opened up some doors that I didn't know were there, and really, really intrigued me to a point of, where you could call it something like ruining life or making it better. It could go either way, depending on what timeline you use.
Yeah, obsessions have a way of doing that, right?
They do. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, who are some of the folks that have mentored you on your fly fishing journey, and what have they taught you?
On my journey with a fly rod, it would be unfair for me to say that my current employer and boss, Mike Schultz, he's obviously a mentor of mine in a lot of ways. He's taught me an insane amount. I've learned a ton through him, and he's definitely helped cultivate where I sit currently in the realm of things and inside of the industry. Greg Senyo obviously is another one who's a big influential piece of my lifetime, especially my adult lifetime. I have an old family friend who I owe a little bit to in the starting end of things. He kind of gave me some points and tips, and those guys definitely helped bring me into a whole new tier of things. I had a good friend growing up. His father actually was a very avid fly angler. His name was Chuck King. And he kind of took me under his wing and let me borrow gear and gave me tips and, kept my head in the game and kept me moving forward with it. And fly tying, especially, that was one that believe it or not, actually, when I got started fly tying, I bought a cheap starter fly tying kit from, I believe it was at Bass Pro Shop. So it would have been their White River fly shop that they have in their locations. And this was long and not incredibly long ago, but I'm 35. So this was in my teen years, and this was back when VHSs were still a thing. And I remember that kit came with a VHS that had an instructional on how to tie the 6 or 8 different patterns that they had in the kit. But the materials in the kit were really, really poor in terms of quality. They were definitely the bottom of the barrel, and the vise was a really cheap kind of get starter basic clamp, the tools, the bobbin, the scissors. And I remember getting extremely frustrated with it when I got started, almost to the point of where I wanted to give up on it. And at the time, this was in the age of the early, to me, the earlier internet, but when form boards were a more common thing. And I remember I had joined a form board for Winston fly rods, actually. And there was a lot of older gentlemen on that forum. And I remember I had made a post on there just kind of airing out my dirty laundry, so to speak, of how I was really struggling with it and how I was entertaining the idea of just donating the kit to somebody else that might want to use it, because I didn't really think that it was for me. And a gentleman on there, and it pains me to this day, I do not remember his name, but he reached out to me privately on there on a private message, and he asked me for my parents' address. And I sent him my parents' address. And about a week and a half later, a big box showed up on my parents' porch. And my dad came to my room and he said, "Cor, there's a package outside with your name on it. I'm not too sure where it's from. Did you order something?" And I said, "No, I didn't order anything. I didn't. I was a kid. I didn't have much money." And I opened the box, and there was a handwritten note in the box from this gentleman on this form board. He was retired from the Navy, I believe. And I want to say he had retired and he was living in Hawaii, but he had a shop here in the lower 48 that he must have had a good relationship with. And he had called them up, and he basically had them assemble a package of materials from the shop, and he sent them all to my house. And from that day on, having access to better materials and getting some positive encouragement from him, along with some of the other guys on that forum board, I was able to figure out a way to find joy in it and maintain my course. And here I am. I wish to this day, I joke about it often when I'm teaching fly tying classes. I wish I could give that man a hug and shake his hand, and just, be able to show him, hey, you look what you spawned. You have a young man who ended up growing up to be a full-time manager of a fly shop here in Michigan that, fly tying is, from being out here at Bobbin is a massive part of our business. And to be a part of that is really cool. But I look back on that and I think about that often as I've grown older and how grateful I am that he was willing to do that for me. He really kept the spark going and built that lifelong obsession out of it. So I think about that often.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. I think it's amazing. I think people sometimes forget the power of small kindnesses, right?
Oh, huge.
And it's amazing. It's always good for your fishing karma, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, it's interesting. I know you're, like so many guys in the shop, you're a native Michigander. I hope I got that right. I'm a Southerner. So if I got it wrong, I apologize.
Yeah. Yeah. No, native, born and bred. And that's for Detroit.
Yeah. And so, one of the interesting things is, if you are, a sportsman, Michigan is a super special place. And, for folks that haven't had a chance to kind of visit the Mitten, why don't you kind of tell folks kind of the whole culture of the lower part of the state and the upper part of the state and what makes it, awesome, not just for angling, but for hunting as well.
Yeah, it's an absolute mecca. I feel very blessed most days to be here and to live in this state that's just very abundant in opportunities. Michigan is an incredible place. I think one of the keynotes that stands out for me and what I tell a lot of people that travel here to fish or are entertaining the idea of traveling here to fish is that variety. Variety is the spice of life, as many say. And there's not really too much here in terms of species that we don't have. We have everything in Michigan from really technical dry fly trout fishing to in absolutely awe-inspiring warm water opportunity, with everything in between, several of the salmon species, as well as your steelhead, and a ton of really cool native species. And obviously kind of being slapped right in the middle of the Great Lakes, your mecca extends in every direction. So no shortage of water here. I joke with people often that you couldn't learn Michigan in a lifetime. I don't think that if you had every day of your life to fish and go explore, you could really fine tune and dial every fishery and watershed that we have here. There's just so much opportunity in so many different corners. You can go uncover manholes and find your way into that. It really always keeps you guessing and learning. And the Great Lakes systems are a big part of my early adult life and kind of places that I've found a lot of my real love and connecting with nature, between Lake Huron, Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Erie. After 2 years ago, the first time I got to fish on Lake Ontario, but between all those Great Lake systems, it's endless in terms of opportunity and what you can do and what you want to pursue, and the seasonal changes. Sometimes, they dictate the species that you target, but ultimately most of these fish species you can target most of the year here, even in the dead of winter. Sometimes you have to drill holes to do so, but there's usually always open moving water to be found and to find some type of enjoyment and fun within. So the variety is a big selling point for me, and why I think anyone that really likes to fish would find Michigan, to be a wonderful place and can find a lot of great opportunity within it. Hunting, yeah, it's obviously, I don't do a ton of hunting myself, but obviously have a lot of friends and family that do. And we have some really awesome whitetail hunting here. We have a smaller elk population in the northern range of the state, and we have some really good grouse and woodcock opportunity, along with your waterfowl through the Lake Erie and St. Clair up into Lake Huron. There's some really incredible migration routes for a lot of the waterfowl. So there's a ton of opportunity for things to do on the sportsman end of things here. And that's probably why I'll end up being here for the remainder of my life. I tell people jokingly that I think if Michigan had a good set of mountains, I honestly would put it up as being one of the coolest states anywhere. Just that's the one thing we lack here is we don't have the high mountain range anywhere. We have some what most people would consider foothills in comparison to real mountains, but we really do have everything you need from an angling standpoint, and we'll always keep you busy guessing and learning more.
Yeah, I think what's really amazing too is, I mean, you don't have to get very far north of, Grand Rapids or Detroit to kind of escape civilization either.
Oh no, it's not far at all. I mean, there's even down where we are near the shop here. I mean, we're southeastern Michigan is where we're based. We're about 30 minutes outside of Detroit. There is opportunity within an hour of here to where you can go, and you have solitude and quiet terrain, and it's you wouldn't know you were so close to a big metropolitan area when you're there. And then the further you go north, the more solitude you can find. And then we have the luxury of another peninsula that sits above us that's connected via bridge, Michigan's Upper Peninsula, which is I call it the Holy Land, because it's like going back in time a lot of the time when you go up there, in terms of how the people live, how the communities are set up, and how the wilderness is. It's very wild and pure and untamed.
Yeah, pretty neat. And so, I was doing research for the interview. I didn't realize that you'd been at Schultz's for over a decade, and I was kind of curious if you could kind of let folks know kind of how you made it to the shop.
Crazy. It's hard to believe it's been that many years now. It feels like it's gone by in the blink of an eye, but yeah, going on. This is my 12th year being employed here and being a part of this business. So been really cool to see the growth and where we've made it to today. And it's really nice for me because smallmouths growing up on Lake St. Clair were definitely kind of one of my Kickstarter species. And they've been held a very strong piece of real estate in my heart and my soul for most of my childhood up to my adult life. So to be a part of a shop that is primarily focused on smallmouth bass is very cool. It's been an awesome ride.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you said you manage the shop. You want to kind of give folks a little bit more of an idea of what you do. And I guess, does that include the G side as well?
Yeah, so I originally hired in here actually kind of on a part-time basis. I tested Mike a little bit. I was working part-time. I took a job up in Alaska, and I worked there for a short period of time, and things didn't quite work out the way they needed to. Consider me kind of young and dumb at that time, between some poor decision making and not really figuring out what I wanted to be doing up there. I ended up leaving early and came back home, and Mike had just opened the shop. I want to say probably about 6, maybe 7 months prior to when I came back, and I had come into the shop a few times and really enjoyed it and liked the vibe, and obviously really loved the whole warm water program. And that was something that I was kind of focused on at that time and wanted to learn more about. And I could see Mike from afar doing what he was doing and really liked it and was attracted to it. And I reached out to him and said, hey, if you need somebody to come in and help out, clean up and sweep floors, I'm good at cleaning and organizing, and I'll work for free if you need me to, just to kind of get my foot in the door. And just happened to work out that a young woman who worked here before I became employed, her name was Katie. She was actually leaving to take a job to work for Orvis, and they were looking for somebody to kind of step in and help fill some time in the shop. And I was able to get, for some lucky grace there on Mike's behalf, he was willing to give me a shot and brought me in, and the rest is history. So I've been here now, like I said, go past 12 years. And I run a good majority and handle a good bulk of our inventory management. So I'm in charge of ordering, reordering, making sure we stay flush in here on the walls, and we have what we need in stock here for customers coming in to pick out goods. G side, I help and contribute quite a bit to the ordering and product importing for that stuff. But we have a younger gentleman by the name of Matt who works here, who's kind of the lead man on that. He does a fair bit more of it than I do. Like I said earlier, I do a bit of both conventional and fly fishing. I split the bill quite a bit with him on that. But yeah, so that's my overall duty and responsibility here.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. I mean, for folks that haven't been in the shop, I mean, I would say, two things. First of all, I mean, the tying stuff is just incredible, right? But then the other thing too is, it's so hard to find shops that will have, 4 or 5 or 6 different rod manufacturers and 4 or 5 different reels. I mean, you guys really have it all in a really pretty compact space.
Definitely. I mean, we've grown. For those that are listening that have never set foot in the store, we started with 2 rooms to begin. In the building that we're in, we've branched into 4 total rooms. So it's went from 2 to 4, grown a little bit. But yeah, overall, it's not a massive piece of real estate. But we definitely pack it in here pretty tight. As you know, you've been here to the shop, you've seen it, and you have variety. Back to that thing we were talking about earlier, variety is the spice of life. And I'm a firm believer that it's important to give people options and to have a variety of things for people to come and see and test out. So that's kind of, I think why over the years we've continued to expand lines and have more product variety in here. I think it's a very valuable asset to our business.
Yeah, and I think too, the tying stuff is amazing, but I think, the subset of that, the natural stuff is really incredible. And, there are only probably 2 or 3 places in the States I would even trust to call and say, I want to get hackle or, fur or hair and like trust that what I got was going to be what I needed. But, it's amazing what you guys have and the quality of the stuff that's hanging on the wall.
Definitely. Yeah. And I would say we work pretty diligently to maintain that pace with things, and that it's definitely a labor of love. But obviously when you have a big part of that is our team here. We have a really good group of guys that work on the floor and on the back end of things along with our guide staff. So they all kind of work together in harmony and help support that train to keep it all rolling. And that's definitely something I have with a lot of our customers, is people know they can trust us and come to us for questions and for help selecting materials. And we're going to give them exactly what they need. That's something I definitely take a lot of pride in here in our business. And I'm very proud of our team for how well they all synchronize to make that happen.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's a super high concentration of very, very fishy people, right?
Definitely. Yep. We've lucked into a lot of good ones over the years, and thankfully not a high turnover rate here in our shop. So most of the people that are employed here, we've added a few new faces and a few have left us over the years, to pursue other things. But a lot of the people that have been here for a very long time, and, hopefully plan to be here for quite some time in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so it's kind of funny watching on social media. You still have snow on the ground, but it looks like things are, thawing out pretty well. But before we get to the fishing, I was kind of curious, as tying season is sort of wrapping up, anything interesting happened at the Vice for you this winter?
I actually, believe it or not, I this winter I probably did a little bit less tying than I normally do. I got a little bit heavier over the last couple of years into I don't want to call it commercial end of fly tying, because I don't quite rank myself with actual commercial fly tyers. I know quite a few of them, and I never really reached the output that most of those guys were kicking out. But I was doing a lot of custom orders for people, and I don't want to say I got burnt out on it, but fly tying kind of became something that it didn't excite me quite as much as it did before I was tying flies for money, if that makes sense. So this winter was kind of a nice reset for me. And I was actually funny because you were here for our Bob in the Hood event in February. And that was like my re-spark with things with fly tying. That really, seeing all those guys together here, having a good time, seeing all the just insane database of wisdom and knowledge and thousands of countless hours spent on the water from guys all around the Midwest and beyond. That kind of reignited my passion a little bit, and have been back on the Vice a little bit more avidly here as of late. So not so much in any interesting flies, but definitely, personally, it was nice this year to take a little bit of time to reset a little bit and then kind of get back into the groove of things. Thanks to the amazing amount of talent and just overall love that we had here for Bobbin this year. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And, people will kill me if I don't ask you how the pre-spawn smallie bite is this spring.
We're not there yet, man. I got to be honest with you. We Michigan, for those of you who haven't spent a lot of time up here, or may not reside here. Our springs really do vary every year, as they do in most places. But our weather, I say often that we experience maybe 1 to 2 months of each season, and then everything else in between is just swing weather. And this March has been no different from years past. Last year we had a pretty warm March where things got going a little bit earlier, but this year we've seen a few warm ups, but most of our rivers right now are still temping in the 40s. Some of them have tickled that 50 mark, and on those really warm, sunny days, you might get some stuff that maybe creeps up into that 50-degree mark. But overall, most of our stuff is still sitting in that mid 40 range, the upper 40s. So our real true fawn, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't really get started until we stay consistent in that upper 40 deck, and we just haven't quite been there yet. So we're picking away at things right now, but April, based on the weather deck and the forecast that they're throwing our way, it looks like we're about to get rid of our last cold night weather here, which is really what I think holds things back. And the weather is going to start to kick a little bit. So April's usually always a phenomenal month to be a fisherman in general here in Michigan, but especially to be a smallmouth fisherman. So we're waiting on it still, man. Everybody's excited and kind of gnawing at the bit, so to speak. Our guides have been on the water. Quite a few trips have been run up to this point. And fishing's been good. Some good fish have come into the bags already this year, but we're kind of on that early cusp of things. So we're looking forward to April as we enter it, first day today of the month. So a lot of good things to come.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting because I just recorded a fishing report with a guide in Southwest Virginia, and where, he's like, yeah, we've probably got about, 2 weeks till they start spawning. So kind of funny. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. We actually were fortunate we've had some very mild winters the last few years. That kind of bums me because I like to ice fish. I like to take my kids ice fishing. So that's a good way to kill winter days. But the last couple of years have been absolutely horrific in terms of ice making up here. At least in the southern end of the state, we haven't really had good, consistent cold weather. This year was our first winter in a number of years now that we've actually maintained a good solid ice face on most of the lakes for over 2 months. Which was nice, and I think that's a necessity for how our ecosystems work. I think here in the Midwest, we kind of need that solid winter every year to create ice and keep some extra water in the lakes. I think it's just a big part of the natural function of the ecosystem. So it was good to get back. And a lot of the guys, a lot of people I talk to, winter is always kind of the complain and moan about it, wishing for spring, but it's a part of our seasons here, and you either love it or you hate it. But I was pretty happy and grateful that we were able to log a nice winter this year. So I think we're still kind of kicking the Band-Aid off from that and waiting for that consistent warm weather to come.
Yeah, there you go. And so while other guys in the shop are chasing smallmouth, you've dialed in the carp game, right?
Yeah, that's been a big part of my lifetime as an adult here. Fly fishing, something that I've taken a lot of enjoyment out of, a lot of learning. It's definitely improved my abilities as an angler, and carp. I love them a lot for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons I really like them is they're readily available in most places. Common carp have a very wide distribution base, especially in the lower 48 here. In most watersheds you can find them in. They're pretty resilient fish, so they can live in poor water quality, good water quality, cold water, warm water, very opportunistic feeders. So they've definitely drawn me in over the years. The technical end of fishing for them is something I always enjoy, and they always keep you guessing.
Yeah, very, very neat. So where are some good spots kind of near the shop to go chase carp?
It's a very flush system here within the Huron. Right, that our shop actually resides right on the bank of. I do a lot of my fishing here in the river, right near the shop, both upstream and downstream. We have some good opportunity in some of the local inland lakes. And then Lake Erie, Lake St. Clair also provides some really good opportunities for people wanting to get out and pursue those fish.
Yeah, and I would imagine maybe best time to target carp kind of depends on where you're fishing and like whether you're in the river or you're trying to get them up on a flat in a lake. But, I'm
Totally.
yeah, I mean, so for me, my only carp experience is blowing shots at carp on smallmouth trips. So,
Yeah.
but for people that are trying to target them more consistently, kind of what are the good times to kind of make a point of chasing them?
I would say on average, the most consistent carp fishing you'll find is generally going to run in that summer time frame. For us here, I would put that probably May, June, July, August. Those are all really phenomenal, consistent months. With tend to have more consistent flow. Temperatures tend to stay a little bit more consistent. Carp function and feed well in cold water. They definitely get a little bit more lethargic, and they tend to break away from high speed current. They'll tend to, they don't all leave the river in the cold winter months, but the majority of them, like here, for example, where the shop is located, it's a pretty short stretch of river, and then it dumps into a small reservoir. Well, I shouldn't call it small. It's a pretty good sized lake. That's a part of the Huron system here, an impoundment that most of those fish will kind of vacate out into in the really cold months. But yeah, I would definitely say it's a summer game for consistency for most people. This is about the time of year when I'll start to go out and look for them. I actually was out the other morning, just kind of walking the bank and doing a little bit of fun fishing, and saw a couple of my first fish in shallower water, more active on the feed front, which was really cool to see. Those were some of the first of the year that I was able to go watch and put eyes on. I tend to these days leave them alone until the water gets into that 50-degree mark, just because they are a little more lethargic, and they still fight and pull hard when it's cold, but I enjoy their energy levels a little bit more when the water's a little bit warmer. They tend to give you a little better show, and you got to put the brakes on them a little bit harder. But yeah, overall, I would say summertime is probably the best, most consistent, time to target those fish here locally in your inland bodies of water, whether they be rivers or ponds or small lakes. And then the Great Lakes stuff, which we do, I try to do that every year. I really love doing that, going up to either Lake Michigan or Lake Huron and targeting those fish on the more flat style fishing approach. That's typically more of a summertime game. I would say, generally speaking, you can get into those fish starting in May out there. Water temps need to get roughly into that, mid 60 point before those fish really start to move into shallower water in mass. And then 70-degree water is generally when those fish are really going to start to push in shallow and feed on those flats and get ready to do their spawning deal. So that's typically on a calendar. It's hard to pinpoint it, but generally June is one of the best months to do that here if you're doing it, farther north on the bigger lake.
Got it. And do you have anything like, mulberry hatches or cottonseed hatches, anything like that occurs locally that really kind of turns the carp on?
Yeah, we have some mulberry fishing here. That's really cool. That's a short window of the season. And I tell people often that's an enjoyable time to catch carp, but it's not a really good time for somebody who's getting started with it, mainly because it doesn't teach you a lot about the fish. Those fish tend to behave much differently when they're eating those berries than they do the rest of the year. So it's enjoyable. I like to do it. But for people who are, getting their feet wet in the game of carp fishing with a fly rod, I would suggest that they try to find fish outside of those things. Just because I think you'll learn a lot more about the fish and their behavior and how they typically behave. The mulberry thing is a blast though, and we do have some good opportunity for that locally around here, which I try to take advantage of. And that's also typically a summertime thing, usually June, July.
Got it. And so in terms of tackle, what's your preferred kind of rod, reel, and leader setup?
So that's going to vary. I would say for the river system here, where I do a bulk of my fishing, I'm opting for a 6-weight. I generally go with a 9-foot saltwater style 6 paired with a floating line, good quality reel, something that has a strong drag. Excuse me. It's just getting over a little head bug, so clearing out the system.
Okay.
But yeah, 9'6" weight. I tend to steer and lean towards those saltwater style 6s, which are the full wells and the fighting butt. Gives you a little bit more pull power on those fish. It works pretty good. Our average fish here in the river system is probably in the neighborhood of about, 6 to maybe that low teen mark where you see fish that are 10, 11, 12 pounds. And there's definitely opportunity for larger fish, but those fish tend to be a little bit smarter and tend to spend time in different places and are a little bit harder generally to find and feed with a fly. But the 6 is pretty comfortable for me. I enjoy the delicacy of the rod. It allows me to be pretty nimble and precise with my fly placement. I would say that for your average person, somebody who hasn't spent a lot of time doing it or doesn't have a lot of experience pulling on heavier fish with a fly rod and lighter tippet, to probably opt for a 7 or an 8 weight, just so you can get a little more ability out of the rod and a little bit more lean power. And then maybe progress on to a lighter rod. But yeah, that's kind of my wheelhouse for that. And then for the big water stuff, when we do the flats fishing, that's a bare minimum of an 8 weight. Those fish tend to run a lot larger on average, and you can easily run into fish that are 20 plus pounds on the flats, with opportunities and shots. Sometimes that fish that go into the 25, 30 pound mark. And for people who haven't held carp or held many carp, a lot of people tend to over exaggerate carp when they see them in the water, because they are a larger species of fish. But a 20-pound carp is an absolute animal. That's a very large fish that has an insane amount of power behind it. And once they get above 20 pounds, they'll be really hard to handle and hold on a light rod. So we used 8s and 9s when we're fishing for them on the bigger water. You're also generally doing a lot more longer distance casting. So, no different than a bonefish or a permit flat, where I need the heavier rod as much to deal with the wind and the ability to put the cast where it needs to go as I do for the fish. But floating lines for that as well. Generally speaking, with tapers and stuff like that, I like kind of in between tapers. So not quite trout taper lines, something with a little bit more added bump in the front of the line, something I can roll cast and also pick up and throw quickly. But I don't need the machine gun style, really heavy, fast paced, massive weight forward lines like Scientific Angler's Bass Bug or Airflow Power tapers. Those are, for me, are generally reserved more for my bass fishing when I'm fishing larger flies. I don't need to be as delicate with my presentation. Carp fly fishing, generally speaking, you have to be a little less invasive with how you put the fly in the water in front of the fish. So yeah, something on the neutral end of things, kind of in the middle, that has power, but still will allow the angler to be delicate. So my go-to line most of the time for those fish is SAA has their MPX taper or their Infinity taper, which I find both of those lines work really well for that. Leader rigging for those fish, I utilize some pre-made stuff often when I'm just kind of quickly rigging up and going out locally. But if I'm doing it right and properly, I will build leaders, generally starting with some monofilament on the back end of the leader, 35 for a 30-pound butt section, and then walking my way down, keeping the leaders pretty much in that 9-foot range. Sometimes I'll go a little bit longer if I need to get the fly to drop a little bit quicker, or I'm dealing with fish that are really spooky. Sometimes on the flats, you'll extend your leader a little bit. But yeah, generally in that 9 to 10-foot range is the sweet spot. And for the river here locally, I often am fishing either 8 or 10-pound fluorocarbon for my final mark on the leader. On the flats up there, you can get away with running a little heavier, fishing 12, sometimes even 15, depending on the day and time and place.
So in terms of on the leader side, just to kind of help folks out, I would imagine your butt's probably 4 or 5 feet?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say usually starting at about 2 to 3 feet on that butt end, and then utilizing a similar kind of 2 foot ratio as I walk down, and then generally going a little bit longer on my tippet end.
Yeah, like 3-2-2 and then tip it, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that's right around the sweet spot. I'm always changing things up and playing with different configurations to see what I like. But yeah, that's around the wheelhouse of what I tend to play with.
Got it. So if we put the mulberry hatch to the side, let's talk about bugs. What do you like to fish?
So that's going to vary, depending on where you're fishing for them. The Great Lakes fish tend to have a much larger dietary base than the fish here that reside locally in our river systems. Those fish on the big water will gladly and willingly pursue 3, 4, sometimes 5 inch plus flies. If you're in the right place and scenario, a lot of crayfish, gulpin, goby imitation. Here in the river, though, I tend to downsize quite a bit. And that's not to say that I don't think you can catch them on bigger flies. I just, based on how the fish feed and generally the areas that they're feeding in their forage base, from what I do, I try to spend I spend probably more time these days observing fish than I do casting to them, just watching them and kind of, trying to figure out more and pick the equation apart. But I often will fish, flies as small as down to a 8 or even a 10 sometimes, depending on what I'm doing or what section of the river I'm fishing. Some of the stretches here are a little bit heavier trafficked these days, with us being here and obviously drawing more people to the local vicinity. There's been more people pursuing carp as years have went on. So I found that downsizing tends to help when you're dealing with fish that are a little bit more pressured. I have a pattern that I fish a lot locally. That's a variant of the McLovin fly. That's a much heavier weighted version where I utilize a tungsten bead and some fairly heavy lead eyes. That fly is designed to drop really quickly and kind of combat the current. A lot of the fish I'm targeting and pursuing in the river are feeding in often fairly quick current speeds. So you need to be able to get that fly to drop down quickly to the fish and almost stand still. I say it's almost comparable to like a Euro nymphing style of approach where you're not casting as far and you're kind of using the weight of the fly to drop it down in front of the fish and drag it into their vicinity. Natural colorways tend to pay bills for me here. We deal with a lot of clearer water on average. So for those guys out there, guys and gals that may be pursuing fish in dirtier water, you can get away with some louder, brighter colors. But here locally, I tend to rely a lot on that natural colorway, the olives, the tans, the browns, sometimes into kind of like that crayfishy orange. But I tend to stay on the not quite always matching the bottom type, but sticking to things that I know exist in nature and staying away from the bright, loud stuff.
Yeah, got it. And so, I guess there would be, maybe kind of, generically kind of two approaches, right? You've either got them kind of rooting around, right? Or you got them cruising. So, kind of want to kind of pick that apart for folks.
Yeah. So the one thing I used for that, and recently did a little presentation at one of the expos we do up here every year in March, the Midwest Fly Fishing Show, and was fortunate enough to get a seat to do a presentation at that, and it was about carp. And one thing that I noticed captivated everybody who was in my talk was I give people a dog analogy with carp. So for people who have experience around dogs and have spent time around them, it's the simple logic of a happy dog versus an unhappy dog. So when you meet a dog that's unhappy for the first time, that's not quite into you or into your presence, that dog has a tendency to be tight and rigid in its body language. So it kind of stiffens up. Its tail's generally not wagging. Its head's not free flowing and bopping around. Its ears are tight and drawn back. A happy dog is quite the opposite of that. A happy dog, the tail is wagging. In the carp circumstance, it would be the pectoral fins are moving clean along with that tail and helping that fish move and adjust itself in the current. And that fish's face is moving around happy like. So I tell people when they're looking at carp, use that analogy to kind of identify your feeding fish as opposed to your negative fish. Your negative fish are those unhappy dogs, the ones that are still, or you kind of have that negative body language to them where they're not looking like they're very interested in what's going around them, and they're a little bit more standoffish and they're kind of observing and sitting still. Those fish are generally, for me, not the best targets. The happy ones, on the other hand, are the better targets. Like you said, those are the fish that are generally rooting around. That tail is wagging freely. Those pec fins are moving along with the fish, helping direct and guide it. And then obviously that mouth, carp are built to be that more of a downward angle feeder. They can easily feed upright, but generally speaking, they do a lot of their feeding on the down end of things where they're tilted towards the bottom, and their mouth is just consistently, they're filter feeders often. So they're sucking up and taking up parts of the bottom and the sediment and the grass, along with food sources, and they're rejecting what they don't want to keep in their mouth. They have, I don't know the exact number, but quite a few sensory membranes. I don't know what the technical term would be for those, but inside of their mouth that kind of tell them what's food and what's not. So it's cool to watch them feed, because it's interesting too when you're feeding them flies, because you have to kind of make a good decision on when to set the hook. Carp can be pretty quick to reject flies even if they do eat the fly. Often there's many times when I'll watch a fish eat my fly, and I still have that little kid in me, and I'll be excited, and I'll pull up a little bit too quickly. And 9 out of 10 times, I'm always trout setting on carp. I'm lifting the rod sharply and setting the hook, as opposed to a strip set. Strip set, I find you'll definitely pull a lot more flies out of the fish's mouth doing it that way. But if you wait too long, you often that fish will spit that fly out as fast as it takes it in. So it's a very visual game most of the time. I think that's something that's always kind of captivated me. I really enjoy that visual element of stalking the fish and finding those happy fish, and sometimes being fortunate enough to feed them. Even the happy fish often will not eat your fly. Carp are a very sensory-based fish. They rely very heavily on scent when they're feeding. So they're able to track and taste those little barbells that you see coming out of the front end on top of their mouth. They're actually tasting through those. So they can kind of pick up their food source before it's even in their mouth or near it. So when you take that out of the equation and you put a fly in there that doesn't have any scent, you got to be pretty convincing with how you choose to feed the fish and fly placement and all those different things. So it's a cool system, and it definitely, I tell a lot of people I talk to in the shop and in my travels that they are a fish that will 100% without a doubt make you a better angler all around. I don't really care what you fish for in your free time. If you want to improve your angling game with a fly rod, a common carp is definitely high on my list of a species that will make you a better fisherman, and for those exact reasons.
Yeah, so it almost sounds like it's almost like bone fishing, right? So you're kind of reading.
Very much so.
Yeah, so I would guess kind of generally the game is you're kind of watching the fish move and eat, and kind of like bone fishing, you want to drop the fly far enough ahead of the fish on the outside side so that you don't spook it, and then you basically want to bring the food kind of into the path at the right time. Is that, am I oversimplifying that, or is that kind of how the game works?
No, that's pretty accurate. I would say it's situational dependent with that. There's a lot of things that I feel that I have been rigid in implementing into my own game that have helped me be a little more consistent with hooking the fish. And like you had mentioned briefly there, how you choose to bring the fly to the fish is an important one. I've noted with our clear water fish here that those fish tend to not like it when you bring the fly to them. And the simple analogy there and thought process is really think in nature, how often does the prey go towards the predator? It doesn't happen very often. You generally, the prey is going to try to make a move away from the predator in any circumstance. With carp, I don't have super elaborate PhD knowledge on how the fish's eyesight is, but based on my experience, I do believe carp have pretty good eyesight in clear water. In good sun conditions, clear water, I think carp can see a lot better than most people would give them credit for. So that angle of approach with the fly made many years of mistakes where in excitement and that youthful play to go to fish and drop the fly and kind of drop the angle of the fly to where it's approaching their head when it's coming down. And you turn a lot of fish off doing that. So, like you had mentioned, kind of that what's referred to in the carp community, I hear out and about is the drag and drop, where it's kind of putting the fly somewhere on the outskirts of the fish and then dropping it down to where it almost meets them on an opposing angle, but enters their line of vision and then settles, some fish, it can be as close as a dinner plate to their face. Other fish, you want to give them a foot to 2 feet. And then it's contrasting, like when you talk about big lake fish, Great Lakes fish, when you're casting to them, it's much more similar to that bonefish, even the tarpon presentation, where you're actually leading the fish quite a bit and then letting the fly come down to its point of contact and then bringing it into their wheelhouse. And sometimes those fish always tend to amaze me, because you can have fish that will pursue and track flies 5, 10, 15 feet, where they don't even hesitate, and they'll track that fly for a ways and eat it. But that's obviously more specific to those bigger water, more carnivore-based carp that I think are just their lifestyle and the way they live and grow up. They're a little bit more opportunistic and predatory in how they feed. But with that being said, I have found a little love with trying to feed those fish minnow patterns over the years. And I won't quite say that I've got it dialed down to an exact science, but right times of year here in the river systems, I have figured out fairly consistent ways of convincing those fish to eat minnows. And that is often you're giving them a little bit more lead space on the fly, where it's kind of backing down to them, but you're still leaving several feet in between the fly and the fish. And then they're making a visual commitment on if they want to eat it or not, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we mentioned a few presentation mistakes not to make, but, couple other things kind of jump out at you that kind of new carp anglers do that, doesn't tilt the odds in their favor?
I think this the one of the main key points on that for me, and one that I think will track any form of angling anywhere in the world for any species of fish, is learning to fish with your eyes before actually casting. Carp is a very visual game. You have to be stealthy. Carp are essentially like one giant eardrum. So their sensory and that lateral line and that ability to feel movement around them is very strong with carp. They're a full 360 feeler. So as opposed to a bass, for example, that has their lateral lines on the side of the fish, where they're feeling from left or right flank, typically, carp are 360. So they can feel off the top. They can feel off the bottom. They can feel from head on. They can feel from tail on, and obviously feel on their sides. So I tell people it's very critical to just learn to slow down and observe. I cannot tell you how many times I have been carp fishing, either by myself or with other people, where you see a fish and you almost get, what's the term I'm looking for here, where you get so locked in and fixated on one fish that you forget to observe your surroundings, and you go to make a motion and a movement and try to get closer to that fish that you're locked in on, and you don't even notice a fish that's closer than that other fish that you end up spooking, and that fish will end up throwing off the rhythm of any other fish that's in the vicinity. So I tell people often that with carp, I prefer one fish games, where if I'm going out and I'm looking for targets, I always love and always pick the fish that's solo as opposed to the fish that's in a group. And by no means will I say that you can't catch carp that are in groups. You definitely can do that. The margin of error is much, much smaller there, though. You don't have the ability to, when you have a group of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, 20 carp that are in a vicinity feeding, or say some of the fish are feeding and some aren't, it's very easy to upset one of those fish. And carp are, from what I've visually seen and kind of keynoted over the years of pursuing them, they're a very community oriented fish. They work well within their ecosystems. The common carp is typically referred to as an invasive species, but in most of their environments here in the Great Lakes, they're completely naturalized. They work with the local native base of fish. Smallmouths and carp will work together frequently, using each other. The smallmouths will use the carp and feed off of their backs as they're kicking up food and spooking things out of rocks when they're rooting around. And they work off one another, and groups of carp do the same thing. If you spook one of them, it's very probable that you're going to spook the majority of them. So that's something that I think is critical for people that are going out and learning how to target them. Learn to find individual fish if you have the luxury of doing that. Don't be afraid of the groups, but definitely you have to tread a lot more lightly when you're targeting fish that are in groups, because one bad move in that group of fish and you likely will blow that group of fish for some time to come. Depending on the watershed you're fishing, they can sometimes reset quickly, but generally speaking, it takes them a while to get back to their comfort space. And until they get back into that comfort space, it can be pretty difficult to feed them flies. But definitely learn to approach the water with your eyes before your rod. I often give people the keynote: if you're really serious about trying to learn how to target and catch carp with a fly, start by going out without a rod. Grab your wading gear or whatever you want to have with you, and go out to your whatever local watershed you have and take walks and find fish and observe them and learn where they're spending time, and watch when they're feeding and when they're not. Learn the areas where the fish are spending time feeding as opposed to just finding fish, and do that without a rod, because most people are very, myself included, even, now having caught hundreds of carp on a fly rod, I still get giddy when I get shots and opportunities at fish, to sometimes where I get a little too excited and I go in too quickly and make mistakes and end up blowing that fish. So, learning to fish with your eyes is a critical one. And just slowing down and really slow movements. I compare it. I had mentioned earlier, I don't do a lot of hunting myself, but I have friends that are very adamant archery hunters, and it's very similar to archery, in comparison to gun hunting for, let's say, whitetails, where if you're going to whitetail hunt with a bow, you likely have to get pretty close to the animal, or let the animal get pretty close to you before you're able to take a clean shot. And it's very similar to carp. You don't have the luxury of, generally speaking, you don't have the luxury of long distance reaching, where you can't see the fish as clearly. And it's very critical, I think, to be able to see the fish feeding and to understand where it is in relation to your presentation and your fly, as well as when the fish eats the fly. So, just be really stealthy, learn how to moonwalk, so to speak, where you're moving at a very slow pace, especially if you're wading. A lot of targeting I do those fish, I try to stay out of the water as much as possible. If I have places I can go in and fish them where I don't have to get in the water, I will always pick that over getting in the water. That has seemed to help me a lot over the years. It sometimes can be a little bit more cumbersome when you do hook the fish, to you have to figure out your entry point into the water and then hope that there's not too much in terms of trouble, wood in the water or anything that they can get wrapped up in, because they will quickly take you to it. But be as stealthy as you possibly can. It'll definitely force you to slow down, and again, I think does nothing but makes you a better angler and helps all your games.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell people, just because you have a pair of waders doesn't mean you need to use them.
100%. Yep, that's 100%. And in the summer months here, even in the springtime, I start wet wading usually when the water hits about 50 degrees. And generally, I'm not doing a lot of deep wading. So at 50 degrees up to my knees, maybe into my thigh region, I'm pretty comfortable with that. And yeah, the less you carry, the better. You want to work on being quiet and as stealthy as possible when pursuing them, because they feel really well. And I think in clear water, especially, they see a lot better than they're given credit for.
Yeah, very cool. Are there any other warm water species, Sleddy, that you go out of your way to chase on the fly rod?
All of them, man. There is not a species of fish I've met in my life that I haven't liked. I enjoy everything from bluegill all the way up to, the largest species I've been able to target in the ocean. But on the warm water front, I have a pretty strong love. I don't get to do it as much as I used to, but I really love freshwater drum. Though that's a really cool native species of fish we have here in the Great Lakes and a lot of our inland rivers. Those ones are a lot of fun and can be a very technical and challenging fish. They also grow to be pretty large. So those are wonderful species. I really, really enjoy bowfin. That's another native species that we have here in the Great Lakes, not to be confused with the snakehead, which is an invasive species, but the bowfin is native. Those fish have been here for a very long time. Those ones are really cool because they have kind of a different temperament than carp. They're a little bit more ballsy, so to speak. They're not typically as afraid of people or boats or wade fishermen. They almost will come investigate you at some times of the year. They're a little bit more robust in that sense of things. So those are really fun to feed with flies. Don't get to see a lot of them in the river throughout the year. There's not a giant population density of them here in the Huron system, but every time I come across one, I get really, really excited. And, I'm hopeful that I can feed it a fly. I also really like gar. Our gar here are really fun and enjoyable, and we have decent population numbers of those fish in both our rivers and our bigger lakes. So, yeah, I all the above. There is not a warm water species of fish I don't like to pursue.
Well, there you go. Well, before I let you go tonight, are there any upcoming events at Schultz Outfitters you want to let folks know about?
The good news, we're event free for a little while here. We have a bass tournament that we're doing on the conventional side of things. That's in May. That's our G side, our bass bash that we do every spring. And then our next big fly event is going to be our demo days event, which that's in June, first Saturday and Sunday of the month. So it's kind of a week-long event that leads up to a bigger program on the weekend. So that one's coming up here. We're looking forward to that, excited for it. And kind of the nice part of the springtime here is we get to go a little bit of time without events here at the store, take a break from our winter routine of quite a few events packed and crammed in there. So gives everybody a little bit of a break and a reset and some time on the water. But yeah, June will be our first one coming up here on the fly end of things.
Very cool. Anything else you want to share with our listeners?
I want to say thanks to everyone who tunes in and listens to this once you put it out there in space, Marv. And I really appreciate anyone who comes along and listens to me speak for an hour.
Well, there you go. And, what's the best way, Sleddy, for folks to kind of follow your adventures on the water and keep up with all things Schultz Outfitters?
Stay in tune with our social media tabs. I mean, we do a lot on the Instagram front of things. That's a big part of the mechanism. We're fortunate to have a really good cat behind the lens and the audio end of things here. Nick Mindsayer, he does the majority of our social media feeds, video work, fly tying stuff. So he's doing most of that on our Schultz Outfitters page there. That's definitely the best way to stay in tap with what's going on here at the store and on the water. I personally am not using social media a lot these days myself, but any good fishing photos and things that I'm doing get passed along to him and regurgitated on the Schultz Outfitters feed. So, and then obviously for anybody who's somewhat local here to the store, or a Michigan or Midwest-based human that ever makes their way over, coming in and stopping in and saying hi, introducing yourself, and be happy to give you updates on what we got going on and share some fishy tales with you.
Yeah, and you've got a pretty active forum on Facebook too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a customer forum on there. So anybody who shops with us or does anything with the store, that's a great resource to get into. And that'll also help anybody that wants to tap into the local angling community. We've seen a lot of people build great friendships and relationships off of that forum over the years and lifelong angling companions. So that's a good one. Schultz Outfitters customer Facebook forum.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt, right? Because custies get it first.
Absolutely. Custy's always good first.
Well, Sleddy, I appreciate you hanging out in the shop for a little bit more than an hour to chat with me this evening. It's been a ton of fun.
Absolutely, Marvin. Thank you so much for having me on, man. And it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, come back anytime. Take care.
Cool. You too, man. We'll see ya.
Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed the interview as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Don't forget to check out the links to all of this episode's sponsors in the show notes. Tight lines, everybody.